The last thing Isaiah saw before the door slammed behind him was the principal's face. A look of disgust that he'd seen far too many times before. But this time, it was different. If you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Before we dive into this, let me ask you, have you ever been in a place where you were treated differently just because of who you are? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've ever felt like an outsider, even in a crowd, hit that subscribe button. You'll want to know what happens next. Now, let me take you to a Tuesday morning in a school that wasn't built for people like Isaiah. Isaiah Walker stood in front of his locker, his fingers brushing over the cold metal, trying to ignore the loud chatter of his classmates around him. It was another day at Heritage Prep, a private school with a reputation for success, exclusivity, and wealth. He wasn't supposed to be here. At least that's how it felt most days. He didn't belong, not really. Heritage Prep was a place where the wealthy and powerful sent their kids, a world where money could buy status and respect. And in that world, Isaiah was an anomaly. A black kid in a sea of perfect, polished faces. He stood out for all the wrong reasons, and every glance from his classmates reminded him of it. But Isaiah didn't have the luxury of pretending it didn't hurt. He couldn't just shut off the way people looked at him, the way they whispered behind his back. The microaggressions were relentless. The quiet stares, the subtle comments. He had learned to laugh it off, to hide his discomfort behind a mask of indifference. But it didn't make it any easier. He grabbed his books and slung his backpack over his shoulder, the weight of it feeling heavier than usual. As he walked down the hallway, the whispers followed him like a shadow. "Do you think he's on scholarship?" One girl whispered to her friend, loud enough for Isaiah to hear. I mean, how else could he afford to be here? Isaiah's stomach twisted, but he didn't let it show. He kept his head down and walked faster, his shoes scuffing against the polished floor. The bell rang and he made his way to his first class, Mrs. Carter's advanced history class. The room was full of the same kids who looked at him like he was a curiosity, not a peer. The ones who asked him, "How do you even get in here?" Or, "Does your mom really pay for your tuition?" Isaiah ignored them, finding his usual seat in the back. It was safer there, less attention, less staring. But today felt different. Today, something was off. There was a tension in the air, an electric buzz that he couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was because he had been hearing the whispers more than usual, or maybe it was because he had finally reached his breaking point. Whatever it was, he couldn't shake the feeling that today was going to be the day that pushed him too far. The class started, but Isaiah wasn't really paying attention. He was too busy keeping his head down, his mind distracted by the looming thought, "What if I don't belong here?" That thought had been eating at him for a while, but now it was impossible to ignore. Halfway through the lesson, Mrs. Carter asked a question, and the room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at Isaiah, as if waiting for him to answer. Isaiah could feel their eyes on him, could feel the weight of every single pair of judgmental stares. They didn't care about the answer. They didn't care if he knew the material. They just wanted to see him mess up, to prove they were right, that he didn't belong here, that he was different. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to stand up and answer. "The answer is 1865, he said, his voice steady despite the way his heart was pounding in his chest. But the room didn't respond the way it usually did. No applause, no praise, just silence. And then a laugh from the front row, barely audible, but it was enough. The kind of laugh that made your skin crawl. "Are you sure about that?" someone said, their voice dripping with sarcasm. Isaiah clenched his jaw, his hands tightening around the edge of his desk. He tried to ignore it. He tried to focus on the lesson, but the words on the board were just shapes. They didn't mean anything anymore. Not here. Not in this place. And then, in the middle of the lesson, it happened. A knock at the door. The principal, Mr. Anderson, stepped into the room. His eyes scanned the class before landing on Isaiah. "I need to speak with you, Mr. Walker," he said, his voice as cold as the February air outside. Everyone in the class turned to look at him. Isaiah's stomach dropped. He didn't need to be told. He knew exactly what this was about. He stood up slowly, trying to mask the shock that rippled through him. "Is something wrong, Mr. Anderson?" he asked, his voice a little too calm. "You'll find out," Mr. Anderson replied, his eyes never leaving Isaiah's face. Isaiah grabbed his bag and followed Mr. Anderson out of the room, the eyes of his classmates still boring into his back. He couldn't stop the voice in his head that kept whispering, "This is it. This is where it all ends." They walked down the hallway in silence, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. "Sit," Mr. Anderson said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Isaiah did as he was told, his heart racing. "Isaiah," Mr. Anderson began, his voice low and steady, "there have been several complaints about you from your classmates." Isaiah's breath caught in his throat. "Complaints?" "Yes, complaints about your behavior in class, about your attitude," Mr. Anderson continued, his eyes fixed on Isaiah. "We've had multiple incidents that have disrupted the learning environment. And after careful consideration, we've decided that it's best if you leave." Isaiah blinked, his mind racing. "Wait, what? You can't just—" "I'm sorry, but the decision is final," Mr. Anderson interrupted. "You're no longer welcome here. You can pack up your things and go home." The words hit him like a ton of bricks. Isaiah felt the world spin around him, his vision blurring. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but nothing came out. His body was frozen, his mind struggling to process what was happening. He didn't belong here, and now they were making sure of it. Isaiah sat in the car, staring out the window, his thoughts racing faster than the city streets. The low hum of the engine and the soft sound of tires against the pavement felt distant, almost like he wasn't even in the car at all. His mom, Rebecca, sat beside him, her fingers tight around the steering wheel. She hadn't said a word since they left the school. Isaiah didn't know what to say either. He didn't know how to explain what had happened, or why it had hit him so hard. They'd kicked him out. The principal had told him to pack up his things and go. No reason, no apology. Just go. Rebecca had pulled up to the school herself, her sleek black SUV pulling into the front parking lot with the grace of someone who owned the place. But this time, she wasn't there for a parent-teacher conference or to cheer him on at a school event. She was there because Isaiah needed her, even if he didn't want to admit it. As they pulled away from the gates of Heritage Prep, Rebecca finally spoke, her voice tight. "Isaiah, what happened? Why didn't you tell me about this before?" Isaiah's eyes flickered over to her, but he didn't answer. He couldn't. Not yet. It wasn't just about the school. It was everything. The way he'd always felt like an outsider, the quiet judgment in the halls, the whispers in the classrooms. But how could he say that to her? She had given him everything, including this life, this education. And now it felt like none of it mattered. Rebecca turned onto the main road, her fingers still clutching the wheel. "You know you don't have to deal with this alone, right? I could have called the principal. I could have." Isaiah cut her off, his voice quieter than he intended. "It wouldn't have changed anything." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. Rebecca blinked, taken aback by his tone. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, after what felt like forever, she said, "You don't think I'd fight for you?" "That I'd." "You don't get it, Mom," Isaiah said, his voice cracking. "It doesn't matter how much money you have, or how much you fight. They're never going to see me like you do. I'm just different. To them, I'm always going to be the kid who doesn't belong." Rebecca's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "That's not true, Isaiah. You belong anywhere you want to." Isaiah turned his head, looking out the side window as the city passed by. His mother's words felt hollow. He knew she meant them, but they didn't make him feel any less invisible. They didn't make him feel like he belonged. They drove in silence for a while longer, the weight of the conversation still hanging between them. Rebecca's mind was racing. She had always done everything she could to give Isaiah the best life possible. But in that moment, she realized something she hadn't fully understood until now. No amount of money or power could shield her son from the world's prejudices. She had protected him, yes, but she couldn't protect him from everything. They pulled into the driveway of their home, a large modern house tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. Rebecca's eyes flickered over to Isaiah, who hadn't moved since they arrived. He still sat in the passenger seat, his hands clenched into fists in his lap. She couldn't help but feel a sting of guilt, something she hadn't let herself feel before. "This isn't just about the school," Isaiah said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, but there was a hint of pain in it. "It's everything. The way people look at me, the way they treat me. It's like I'm invisible, Mom. Like I'm not even real." Rebecca swallowed hard. The tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed threatened to break through. She hadn't wanted to see it, but now she couldn't ignore it. Isaiah was hurting, and she had no idea how to make it stop. She had given him everything, but it still wasn't enough. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't know." Isaiah didn't respond. He couldn't, because the truth was he didn't think she could understand. She had never lived the way he did, had never been the only black kid in a room full of people who didn't see him, didn't care to. She couldn't understand the loneliness, the frustration, the quiet anger that came from trying to fit into a world that wasn't built for him. Rebecca reached out, placing a hand gently on his arm. "We'll fix this, Isaiah. Promise. I'll talk to the school." No," Isaiah said quickly, shaking his head. "I don't want you to fix it. I just want to get through it. I don't need you to fight my battles for me." For a second, Rebecca just looked at him. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the same vulnerability she'd worked so hard to protect him from. But maybe she'd been protecting him the wrong way. Maybe she had kept him so shielded that he didn't know how to face the world on his own. "I don't know how to make this better," she said softly. Isaiah's eyes met hers, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something in his gaze. Something she hadn't seen in years. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was resignation. But whatever it was, it made her heart ache. "You can't," Isaiah said, his voice barely a whisper. "But you can just be here. That's all I need." Before Rebecca could say anything else, her phone buzzed. She glanced down, and her heart skipped a beat when she saw the name on the screen. Heritage Prep Principal. She exhaled, a deep breath she didn't realize she was holding. Without a word, she picked up the phone and answered. Isaiah didn't listen to the conversation. He didn't need to. He already knew what was coming. Rebecca hung up a few minutes later, her expression unreadable. "I'll be back in a few hours. I need to take care of something." Isaiah turned his head, his heart heavy. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to make sure they know who you are," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "And they will never forget you." Isaiah didn't know whether to believe her, but as she pulled out of the driveway, the sound of the engine fading into the distance, something inside of him shifted. Maybe things could change. Maybe his mom could make a difference. But for now, he was alone with his thoughts, and he had no idea what was coming next. What is Rebecca planning to do? Will she be able to fix the mess Isaiah finds himself in? Can Isaiah trust his mother to really help? Or is he on his own in this fight? Isaiah sat in his room, staring at the walls, the silence pressing in on him. The day had stretched on in a blur, and now all he had left was the heaviness of his own thoughts. His phone sat on the desk, face down, but he hadn't even checked it. He couldn't. Every time he thought about picking it up, his mind raced with 1,000 unanswered questions. Why had Mr. Anderson kicked him out? Was it really because of a few complaints, or was it something more? Was it the way people treated him, treated them every single day? The weight of it all felt like too much to carry. He rubbed his eyes, trying to push the thoughts away. But they wouldn't go. They lingered. And no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't welcome in a place that was supposed to be his. His mom had left hours ago. She'd promised she'd handle it, but deep down, Isaiah knew that nothing would change. She could talk to the principal, threaten to pull strings, even leverage her wealth, but it wouldn't erase the truth. It wouldn't stop the whispers. It wouldn't stop the looks. Isaiah grabbed his basketball from the corner of the room, a habit that had helped him forget everything. It wasn't much, just a way to clear his head. His sneakers hit the pavement with a familiar thud as he made his way to the neighborhood court. The street was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of cars on the highway and the soft shuffle of his sneakers. He dribbled the ball aimlessly, trying to focus on something other than his own thoughts. It wasn't until he got to the court that he realized he wasn't alone. A few kids were already there, shooting hoops, laughing, their voices carrying through the air. Isaiah didn't want to join them, didn't want to deal with anything that felt like another reminder of the world he didn't quite belong to. But one of the guys, Marcus, called out to him. "Yo, Isaiah, you playing or what?" Isaiah hesitated, the ball bouncing between his hands. Part of him just wanted to turn around and go home. But the other part of him, the part that needed to feel something else, anything else, walked onto the court. "Yeah, I'm in," he said, his voice rougher than he meant it to be. The game was nothing special. Just a few guys from the neighborhood playing a pickup game on a late afternoon. It didn't matter. Nothing about that moment was about winning or losing. It was just about losing himself for a while. And for the first time that day, Isaiah felt his heart rate slow, his mind quieting as he sank into the rhythm of the game. The ball bounced and Isaiah made a clean shot, the ball swishing through the net with a satisfying sound. He heard a few low cheers, and for a second he felt normal. No one was looking at him because of his skin color. No one was whispering behind his back. It was just a game. But even in that small victory, Isaiah couldn't escape the reality waiting for him when the game ended. He could pretend for a few minutes, but as soon as he left the court, the weight of everything, the rejection, the whispers, the feeling of being out of place, would hit him again. As the game wound down and the sun began to dip below the horizon, Isaiah finally dribbled the ball back toward the edge of the court. The guys high-fived him, but the smiles felt hollow. He wasn't part of their world either, not really. He was just another kid with a ball, someone to pass the time with. "Hey, you good?" Marcus asked as Isaiah walked to the bench, tossing the ball back into the basket. His tone was casual, but there was something more to it. Maybe Marcus could tell that Isaiah wasn't really here. He wasn't really with them. "I'm good," Isaiah muttered. Even though the lie felt bitter in his mouth, Marcus didn't push it. Instead, he grabbed his own ball and shot a few more baskets, his movements easy and natural. Isaiah watched him for a while, lost in his own thoughts. The thing was, Isaiah didn't want to talk about it. Didn't want to admit how much everything hurt, how alone he felt even in a room full of people. As the last shot was made, Isaiah tossed his phone into his pocket and walked home. Rebecca hadn't come back yet, and something about that felt off. He had expected her to at least call or text. But the longer he waited, the more he realized that maybe she couldn't fix everything. Maybe there were things that even she couldn't change. He collapsed onto the couch, his head sinking into the cushion. The house was too quiet, the silence too loud. He closed his eyes, but every time he did, he saw the same thing. That look on Mr. Anderson's face, the way the words had left his mouth like they'd been rehearsed. "You're no longer welcome here." It echoed in his head, over and over again. Isaiah didn't know how long he'd been lying there when his phone buzzed, snapping him out of the trance. It was a message from his mom. "I need to talk to you. Call me when you get this." His heart skipped a beat. Was it about the school? Was she finally going to fix this? He picked up the phone and dialed her number. The line rang once, then twice. On the third ring, she picked up. "Isaiah." Her voice was tight, like she had something heavy on her chest. "We need to talk." "I know," Isaiah said, his voice small. "What's going on?" There was a long pause, and then, finally, she spoke. "I tried. I really did. But they're not going to take you back." Isaiah's stomach dropped. He didn't know whether to feel relieved or angry. "So that's it then?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. "There's nothing more we can do?" Another long pause. He could almost hear her taking a deep breath on the other end. "Isaiah, there's something I need to tell you. The truth about why you were kicked out." What is the truth Rebecca's been keeping from Isaiah? Will he finally get the answers he's been searching for? How will Isaiah react when he hears what his mom has to say? Isaiah wasn't sure what he expected when he showed up at his mom's office the next day. But it wasn't this. The glass doors to her office building slid open with a soft whoosh as Isaiah stepped inside, the cool air inside stark against the warmth of the outside. He didn't know exactly what he was walking into, but the look on his mom's face when she'd called him earlier had made it clear. This wasn't over, and it wasn't going to be easy. Rebecca's office was sleek, modern, with polished surfaces and a faint scent of fresh coffee in the air. She sat at her desk, her back straight, her hands folded neatly on the surface. When she saw Isaiah enter, her face softened, just for a second, but the weight in her eyes didn't change. "Sit down, Isaiah," she said, gesturing to the chair in front of her desk. She was trying to be calm, trying to make this easier, but the tension was still there, thick between them. Isaiah took a seat, his fingers fiddling with the hem of his shirt. He didn't want to be here. He didn't want to hear what she had to say. But the truth was, he didn't have a choice. She was his mom, and no matter how much he wanted to shut her out, he couldn't. "I don't get it," Isaiah said, his voice low. "You said you were going to fix this. What happened?" Rebecca took a deep breath. She was avoiding his gaze, her fingers tapping on the surface of the desk. "I tried. I really did. But there's something you don't know." Isaiah leaned forward, his heart beginning to race. "What's that?" Rebecca paused. Her eyes flickered to the side, then back to Isaiah. "The truth about why you were kicked out of Heritage Prep." Isaiah blinked, his pulse quickening. "What do you mean? You said it was just complaints, right?" Rebecca shook her head slowly. "It's not just that, Isaiah. The complaints are part of it, but there's more. Something I didn't want to tell you." Isaiah sat back in the chair, the words hanging in the air, thick and heavy. "What is it?" Rebecca took a long breath, then exhaled slowly. "Your father," she said quietly. Isaiah's head snapped up. "What about him?" Rebecca hesitated, her eyes never leaving his. "He's the one who made the call to the principal. He's the reason they decided to let you go." The words hit Isaiah like a punch to the gut. His father, the man who hadn't been a part of his life for years, the man who hadn't cared enough to even show up for him? Isaiah's hands balled into fists at his sides. "You're telling me my dad made them kick me out?" His voice was a mix of disbelief and anger. "Why?" Rebecca looked down at her desk, avoiding his gaze. "Because he has connections, and he wanted you out of that school. He didn't want you there." Isaiah's heart pounded in his chest. The room felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls were closing in on him. His dad, of all people, had done this? The man who had walked out of his life years ago had just decided to make this choice for him, to take everything away. But why? Isaiah's voice cracked. "Why would he do that? I thought he didn't care about me." Rebecca swallowed hard, her voice breaking. "He doesn't, Isaiah. Not the way you want him to. But the truth is, he never wanted you to be a part of that world. He didn't want you around people who looked like them. He didn't want you to get close to the kind of people who—" She stopped herself, her eyes wide, almost as if she had just said too much. Isaiah's mind was spinning. He couldn't breathe. The words didn't make sense. How could his dad, how could someone who didn't even show up for birthdays, for school events, for anything, have this kind of power? "This is crazy," Isaiah muttered, shaking his head. "He has no right to do this. He doesn't even care about me." "I know," Rebecca said softly. "But he didn't care about you the way I care about you. And I didn't want to tell you this. I wanted to protect you from it. But you need to know. He made this decision, not you. And the fact that he's still pulling strings in your life, even from a distance, that's something you'll have to deal with." Isaiah couldn't stop the anger that bubbled up inside him. His father had never been there, never supported him, and now, in the one place he tried to make a life for himself, at that school, his father had torn it all down. "I don't need him," Isaiah said, his words coming out sharp and cold. "I never did." Rebecca bit her lip, fighting back tears. "I know, but I didn't want you to feel like you're fighting against everything, against him, on your own. I'm here. I'll always be here." Isaiah stayed silent. He didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't sure what he wanted from her. He wasn't even sure what he wanted for himself anymore. The truth was, All he'd ever wanted was to belong. And now, even that seemed impossible. Rebecca took a deep breath, breaking the silence. I'm not going to let this define you, Isaiah. I'll help you get into another school. We'll figure this out. I'll make sure you have a future that your dad doesn't control. Isaiah looked at his mom, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time he saw the worry on her face. He saw the weight she carried for him, for everything she had tried to protect him from. I don't want your money to fix this, Isaiah said quietly, his voice raw. I don't want to keep running. I just want to be me. Rebecca's eyes softened. She reached out, placing her hand on his. You don't have to keep running. We'll face this together. But we have to make sure you don't let it break you. I won't let it break you. Isaiah squeezed her hand, the smallest sense of comfort in the storm of everything else. Maybe he didn't have all the answers. Maybe the road ahead was unclear. But one thing he knew was certain. He wasn't alone in this. Not anymore. The days after Rebecca's revelation felt like a blur, a constant tug-of-war between hope and frustration. Isaiah went through the motions, schoolwork, meetings with his mom's lawyers, calls from the school he'd been kicked out of, but none of it felt real. It was all just noise. He tried to focus on the small things like his basketball games, but even there, he couldn't escape the feeling that something was missing. He wasn't the same anymore. The world had changed for him in ways he didn't know how to put into words. One evening, he was sitting on the front steps of their house, his feet resting on the bottom step, his mind far away. The street was quiet, too quiet. It wasn't like the usual chatter of kids playing basketball or cars driving by. Tonight, everything felt still. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a text from his mom. Isaiah, can you meet me at the office? We need to talk. He stared at the screen for a long moment. His first instinct was to ignore it. He didn't want to talk anymore. He didn't want to hear any more promises, any more "we'll fix this" speeches. But deep down, he knew he couldn't keep running from this. He couldn't bury himself in basketball or the neighborhood court forever. With a sigh, he stood up, shoved his phone in his pocket, and walked to the car. Rebecca's office was even quieter than usual. She sat at her desk, staring at a pile of papers, her hands folded on top. When she saw him come in, she gave him a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Have a seat, Isaiah, she said, motioning to the chair across from her. He sat down without a word. There was no point in pretending he didn't know something serious was about to be said. The look on her face told him everything he needed to know. Whatever this was, it wasn't good. Isaiah, she began, her voice steady but low. We've been trying to fight this, trying to get the school to reconsider, but I've spoken with their lawyer. I don't think we're going to win this. Isaiah's heart sank, but he didn't let it show. What does that mean? He asked, his voice tight. It means that the board made their decision, and they're sticking to it. No second chances. She paused, her fingers tapping the desk as if trying to keep herself steady. You're not going back to Heritage Prep. The words hit him like a punch in the gut. He'd been trying so hard to stay positive, to believe that things would turn around. But now he couldn't ignore it anymore. It was final. The doors were closed, and nothing he or his mom did could change it. Isaiah looked down at his hands, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. So that's it? Just like that? I'm done. Rebecca leaned forward, her expression full of regret. I'm sorry, Isaiah. I thought I could fix this. But it's not just about the school anymore. It's about the people who make the rules. They've made their decision, and there's nothing we can do. Isaiah could feel the anger building in his chest. The injustice of it, the unfairness, it burned. But there was something deeper, something more than just anger. There was this ache in his chest, a deep feeling of betrayal. His dad, the one person who could have stopped this, had chosen to make things worse. And the rest of the world seemed to follow suit. His hands trembled, and he stood up suddenly, unable to sit still any longer. This isn't right. Why does it always have to be like this? His voice cracked as the frustration, the sadness, the confusion bubbled up. Why do I have to be the one to pay for everything? Rebecca's face softened, and she stood up, moving toward him. I know this is hard. I know you're angry, but this doesn't define who you are. The world's never going to make it easy for us, but we don't have to let it break us. Isaiah shook his head, stepping away. I don't want to hear that right now, Mom. He walked to the window, staring out at the city skyline. The view from the office was impressive, but all he saw were the things that felt like they were slipping away. His future, his sense of belonging, everything he'd worked for. I don't want to hear you tell me it'll be okay, he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. Because right now it doesn't feel okay. Rebecca didn't say anything. She knew he was hurting, and no words could fix this. Not now. Not when everything felt so broken. He turned back to her, his chest tight. I just want to be normal. I don't want to fight anymore. I know, she said softly, walking toward him. But sometimes the fight chooses you, and you can't run away from it. You have to decide what you're going to do with it. Isaiah's jaw tightened as he looked at her. The silence between them was thick, heavy. Finally, he spoke, his voice a mixture of defeat and resolve. I don't know if I can do this anymore. I don't know if I can keep fighting for something that feels like it was never meant for me. Rebecca's eyes filled with sorrow. She reached out, resting her hand on his arm. You don't have to fight it alone. I'll be here with you every step of the way. But even as she said it, Isaiah felt the distance between them growing. He didn't know if she really understood. She couldn't. She hadn't lived his life, hadn't been the one constantly fighting for a place to fit in. He felt like he was standing at the edge of something, and he didn't know if he had the strength to step forward. He turned away, his mind racing. What now? What's next? A few hours later, after the meeting at the office, Isaiah found himself walking back to the house. The air was cool, the street lights casting long shadows on the sidewalk. He didn't feel the usual comfort of home, didn't feel the peace he'd always associated with this place. Tonight, everything felt off. As he walked, his thoughts circled back to the same question. What now? He'd lost the one thing he'd worked so hard for. His friends, his future, all of it was slipping through his fingers. And nothing Rebecca could say would make it feel any better. No amount of money or status could protect him from the reality of what had happened. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the empty street as he walked toward the front door. His hand hovered over the doorknob, and for a brief moment, he wondered what life would be like if he could just walk away from it all. What will Isaiah choose to do now? Will he accept defeat, or will he fight for his future? How will Rebecca help him when the fight feels too much to bear? The next few days were a blur. Isaiah barely slept, barely ate, and when he did, it was only to pass the time. He had a weight in his chest that made everything feel distant, like he was living in someone else's life, someone else's pain. He spent most of his time alone, walking the neighborhood streets, his sneakers hitting the pavement with a steady rhythm. It didn't help. Nothing helped. He'd go home and sit in his room, staring at his phone that never rang, never buzzed. He'd see his mom's messages, but they all started sounding the same. We'll get through this. I'll help you. But Isaiah was losing faith. What was the point in fighting when it felt like everything was already stacked against him? One evening, his mom called him into the kitchen. The warm, familiar smell of dinner filled the house, but the comfort of it felt distant. Isaiah couldn't bring himself to care about food. He just felt numb. I made your favorite, Rebecca said softly as he walked in, her voice thin, almost tentative. She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Isaiah glanced at the plate of spaghetti in front of him but didn't move to sit down. His mind was a million miles away. I'm not hungry. Rebecca's face fell. She set the plate down on the counter with a sigh. Isaiah, we need to talk. About what? His voice was sharp. He couldn't help it. It was like all his frustration and fear were leaking out, and it hurt too much to keep it inside. What else is there to say? I'm not going back to school. Dad screwed everything up, and nothing's changing. So what's the point of talking anymore? Rebecca winced, her hands trembling as she wiped them on a dish towel. I know this isn't easy, but I've been thinking. You don't have to give up. Isaiah turned away, his chest tight. You don't get it. I can't keep doing this. I don't want to keep pretending like everything's fine when it's not. His mom's face softened, her voice quieter. I know, Isaiah. I know. But giving up isn't the answer. You are worth fighting for. Isaiah's fists clenched at his sides. He was fighting so hard to keep it together, but the weight of it all was crushing him. I don't care what you say. I can't fight anymore. It's too much. I'm done. Rebecca stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. Isaiah, please don't say that. He turned around to face her, his voice louder than he intended. You don't understand. You're not the one who's been kicked out of everything. You're not the one who's had the door slammed in your face every time you try to fit in. He swallowed, his throat tight with emotion. I don't know who I am anymore. There was a pause, the silence thick between them. His mom reached out, placing a hand on his arm. I know it feels like you've lost everything, but you haven't lost you. She spoke gently, her voice full of pain. You're still here, Isaiah, and you're still worth more than anyone's opinion of you. Isaiah shook his head, tears stinging his eyes. He pulled away from her, walking toward the back door. He couldn't breathe in here anymore. He couldn't keep hearing those words when they felt like lies. I need some air, he muttered, pushing through the door and stepping out into the yard. The cool night air hit him like a slap, and he welcomed it. Anything to numb the pressure in his chest. He leaned against the side of the house, staring out into the darkness. His thoughts were spiraling. What now? What was he supposed to do when the one thing he had worked hardest for, a place where he belonged, was ripped away from him without a second thought? His phone buzzed in his pocket. He took it out, almost not wanting to look at it. But there was a name on the screen, his mom's number. She had sent him a text. I love you, Isaiah, and I know you're hurting, but you can't quit. Not like this. He stared at the screen for a long moment. His mom had tried to hold everything together, tried to keep him from feeling the weight of what had happened. But he couldn't ignore it anymore. His mind flashed back to the day he'd been kicked out of school. The principal's office, the conversation that felt like it was happening to someone else. Mr. Anderson's words echoing in his ears, we just think this isn't the right fit for you. Those words hadn't just been about the school. They had been about him. Isaiah had spent so long trying to prove he was good enough. But maybe he had been wrong. Maybe he wasn't meant to fit into a world that didn't want him. The thought hit him harder than he expected. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of it all pressed down on him. But then, something shifted. A quiet voice inside his head told him not to give up. Not yet. He knew he couldn't just walk away. He couldn't let his dad's choices define him. Not when there was still so much fight left in him. Isaiah let out a shaky breath and typed a reply to his mom. I'm not giving up. I'll figure this out. But I need time. He sat down on the grass, feeling the cold bite of the earth against his legs. The weight in his chest hadn't gone away. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe it wasn't about having all the answers. Maybe it was about deciding that he wouldn't let this break him. He stayed outside for a while longer, his thoughts scattered. It wasn't that he had everything figured out or that the pain had gone away. It was just that, for the first time in days, Isaiah felt like he could breathe. Maybe he didn't know what his next move was. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a choice. Will Isaiah finally find the strength to fight for himself? Can he overcome the weight of everything that's been thrown at him? What's Isaiah's next step in reclaiming his future? Will he trust his mom, or go at it alone? Isaiah didn't know how long he'd been sitting on the porch when his mom came outside. The night was quiet, the stars barely visible behind the heavy clouds that had settled over the city. His mom stood in the doorway for a moment, her face soft and tired, before stepping out into the cool air. Mind if I sit with you? Rebecca asked, her voice gentle but carrying an underlying weight. Isaiah shook his head, barely acknowledging her presence. His gaze still focused on the streetlights that flickered in the distance. He didn't want to talk. Not yet. But he knew she wouldn't leave until he did. Rebecca sat next to him, not too close, but close enough that he could feel the heat of her body beside him. They sat in silence for a long while, just watching the world around them. The only sound was the rustle of leaves in the trees, the hum of a distant car engine. It was a peaceful night, but for Isaiah, it felt like he was suffocating. "I've been thinking," Rebecca finally said, her voice almost lost in the stillness. Isaiah didn't look at her. "About what?" "About everything." She paused, her voice faltering. "About you. About the choices you're making." Isaiah's chest tightened. "What choices?" "I'm just trying to survive, Mom." Rebecca turned to him, her expression soft but firm. "And I understand that. But you can't let what happened to you define who you are. You can't let it be the thing that breaks you. Not this." He turned his head to look at her then, his eyes burning with frustration. "You don't get it. You didn't live through this. You didn't spend your whole life trying to be good enough for people who never even wanted me." She didn't flinch, didn't back away. Instead, she met his eyes, her gaze steady. "I may not have lived through it in the same way, but I've seen what it's doing to you, Isaiah. And I can't just sit back and watch you let this destroy everything." "I'm not letting it destroy me," he shot back, his voice strained. "I'm just trying to figure out how to keep going when the world keeps knocking me down." Rebecca reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "You don't have to do it alone. You don't have to fight everything on your own. I can help you. We'll figure this out together. But you have to want to keep fighting. You have to be willing to believe there's still a way forward." Isaiah pulled his arm back, his frustration boiling over. "I don't even know if I can anymore. You said it yourself, Mom. The school won't take me back. My dad, he's made sure I'll never fit in with them. What am I supposed to do now?" Rebecca's face softened. "I know it feels like there's no way forward, but sometimes you have to dig deeper. Find the strength inside you that you didn't know you had." He stared at her, unsure if he even had that strength. It felt like every part of him had been used up, drained by months of fighting for a future that now seemed so far out of reach. "I'm not sure I have anything left." For a moment, Rebecca didn't say anything. She just looked at him, her eyes full of both love and understanding. And then she spoke, her voice quiet but strong. "You don't have to fight this alone. But I can't fight it for you. You have to decide if you're willing to stand up for yourself, no matter how hard it gets. No one can take that from you. Not your dad. Not the school. No one." Isaiah's heart pounded in his chest. He looked at his mom, seeing the pain in her eyes, the worry etched on her face. And for the first time in a while, he wondered if maybe she was right. Maybe he was stronger than he thought. Maybe there was something left inside him worth fighting for. The truth hit him hard then. He wasn't fighting for the school. He wasn't fighting for anyone else's approval. He was fighting for himself, for his own future, for the chance to finally live a life that wasn't defined by other people's expectations. "I don't know if I'm ready," he admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca nodded. "You don't have to be. You just have to start. It's not about having it all figured out. It's about making the choice to keep moving forward, even when it feels impossible." Isaiah's gaze drifted to the horizon, the distant lights of the city flickering in the night. For a moment, the weight of it all seemed almost too much to bear. But then, something shifted inside him. It wasn't much, just a small spark of hope, but it was there. And for the first time in days, he felt like he could breathe again. "I don't know what's next," he said quietly, his words full of uncertainty. "But I'll try. I'll try to figure it out." Rebecca smiled, a small, knowing smile that said everything without needing words. "That's all I'm asking for, Isaiah. Just keep going. We'll figure this out together. You don't have to do it alone." They sat in silence for a while longer, the cool night air brushing against their skin. Isaiah wasn't sure where this path would take him. He didn't know if he would find a way back to the life he thought he wanted. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't so afraid of what lay ahead. Will Isaiah be able to take that first step? Can he find the strength to fight for his future, even when everything feels stacked against him? What's next for Isaiah? Can he finally break free from the shadows of his past and make a future for himself? The days after that conversation with his mom were a blur, but something inside Isaiah started to shift. He stopped waiting for permission to move forward, stopped thinking that everything had to be perfect. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a choice. A few weeks later, as the leaves were beginning to turn golden in the cool fall air, Rebecca sat down with him at the kitchen table. She had a folder in front of her, and her face was serious. But there was a glimmer in her eyes, one that told Isaiah she had something important to share. "Isaiah, I've been talking to the lawyers," she began, her voice steady but carrying an excitement that was hard to hide. "We're not going to give up on you. We've filed a formal appeal. The board of the school is reconsidering the decision." Isaiah froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "Wait, what? You mean they're actually going to listen?" Rebecca nodded. "We've made it clear that this was a mistake, that you deserve a second chance. They've agreed to meet with us next week. It's not a guarantee, but it's a step forward." For the first time in months, a small spark of hope flickered in Isaiah's chest. It wasn't just about going back to the school. He knew it wasn't that simple. But the idea that someone was finally listening, that they hadn't completely closed the door on him, felt like a gift he hadn't expected. I don't know what to say," Isaiah muttered, his voice thick. His eyes were wide, disbelief still written on his face. "Are you serious? After everything? After all that's happened?" Rebecca smiled, her expression full of pride. "It's not over, Isaiah. It's never been over. Not as long as we keep fighting." Isaiah sat back in his chair, trying to process what this all meant. It wasn't just a chance to go back to school. It was a chance to stand up for everything he had worked for. A chance to prove that he could rise above the mistakes, above the unfairness, and carve out a path of his own. For the first time, he wasn't just fighting for a place in the world, he was fighting for himself. A few days later, as the meeting with the board drew closer, Isaiah found himself standing in front of the mirror, adjusting his jacket. His reflection stared back at him, uncertain and nervous. He wasn't sure what he was expecting to happen, but he knew he had to walk into that room with his head held high. No more hiding, no more letting other people define who he was. "Ready?" Rebecca's voice cut through the quiet, her words filled with support. She was standing in the doorway, looking at him with a warmth that grounded him. Isaiah nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I guess so." They drove to the school in silence, the weight of the day hanging over them. As they pulled into the parking lot, Isaiah's nerves kicked up again, but this time, he didn't let them control him. He wasn't that scared kid anymore. He was someone who knew what he deserved. Together, they walked into the school, heading toward the boardroom where the meeting would take place. The familiar hallways felt different now, strangely distant, like a place he no longer belonged. But as they stood outside the door, Isaiah felt a surge of determination that pushed away the doubt. The meeting was intense, full of legal jargon and questions that felt like they were coming from a place of judgment. But Isaiah kept his head high, kept his voice steady, even when it felt like the room was pressing in on him. He wasn't just there to defend himself. He was there to claim his place. When the meeting finally ended, the board members told them they would make a decision in the next few days. It wasn't the answer Isaiah had been hoping for, but he could feel a shift in the room. There was something different now, something that told him this fight wasn't over. As they walked out of the building, Rebecca put a hand on his shoulder, her eyes full of pride. "You did great," she said softly. "You stood up for yourself. That's what matters." Isaiah nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He didn't know what the outcome would be, but he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer the same person who had walked into that school weeks ago. He had changed. A few days later, Isaiah received the phone call he had been waiting for. The board had met, and after careful review, they had decided to reinstate him. It wasn't a simple victory, but it was enough. Enough to show that he had earned his place. Enough to prove that he wasn't going to be erased by the mistakes of the past. Rebecca was the first person he told, her reaction immediate and full of joy. "You did it, Isaiah. You really did it," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You fought for what was yours, and you won." Isaiah laughed, the weight of everything lifting off his shoulders. "We did it, Mom. We did it together." The news spread quickly. Isaiah was going back to school. It wasn't just about the classroom or the grades anymore. It was about proving to himself, to everyone, that he was worth more than the labels placed on him. He had fought and he had won. The first day back at school was a blur of familiar faces, whispers in the hallways, and teachers who had once dismissed him now offering their support. Isaiah walked the halls with a new confidence, his head held high. He had earned his place here, and this time, he wasn't going to let anyone take it away from him. Later that evening, Isaiah sat with his mom at the kitchen table, a quiet peace settling over them. The victory was small, but it meant everything. It wasn't just about going back to school. It was about reclaiming his future, about finding the strength to rise above it all. "I'm proud of you," Rebecca said, her voice full of tenderness. "You've always been stronger than you knew." Isaiah smiled, his heart full of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." She squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening. "You didn't need me to fight. You just needed someone to believe in you." As they sat there together, Isaiah realized something. It wasn't just about the victory, the school, or even the fight itself. It was about the love and support that had carried him through it all, the belief that, no matter what, he had a family who would never let him give up. He wasn't just back at school. He was back in his life, and he was ready to make it his own. Isaiah looked out the window at the sunset, the world stretching before him like a canvas waiting to be painted. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. He was ready. For the first time in his life, he was finally ready to take control. Do you believe some people are worth the wait? Drop a heart in the comments if you think love and support can help us overcome anything. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.